right, today we're going to show you guys how to tile a bathroom tub surround with a window in it, which is another obstacle that there's a few tricks that you need to know to do a good job with it. This bathroom today, we're going to be doing a wood look tile, and we're going to stack them vertically so they run up and down. And on the floor, we're going to have them come out vertically across the floor. And then we're going to show you how to integrate a hexagon tile into the wood by cutting the wood and allowing the hexagon tiles to fit in. It's really kind of a fun, unique look. Additionally, on this wall, we want it to pop and stand out differently. And so we've got some long 12-inch, probably 2-inch by 12-inch rectangular tiles that we're going to lay in probably a brick bond lay pattern up this wall. All right, the first thing you do when you do any tile job is you got to figure out how you're going to lay it out. Because depending on how you lay it out, you'll end up with little scab pieces or areas where you have a tiny sliver of tile, which is very difficult to deal with. So what we've done here today is we've taken the overall width of the window, which is 35 7/8. Half of that is 17 15/16. So we've made a center point line. Now what we've done is we've taken a piece of one of our large tiles and just cut off a little piece. It's a lot easier to hold this than a giant full tile. And we're going to lay this out. So these tiles measure 5 7/8. So half of that is going to be, let's see, about 2 15/16. So we're going to make a mark on the tile at 2 15/16. And then I'm going to line it up with my center mark. And I'm going to mark each side of the tile. Now we're going to do an 1/8 inch gap for our tile spacing. So then I'll mark the next one and I'll leave an 1/8 inch gap. I'll mark the next one, leaving an 1/8 inch gap. Then I come to the wall. Then I'm going to come 1/8 off of that and make a line. So that line right there is going to represent our starting point. You can either work from right to left, left to right, it doesn't matter. So then we're going to take that line that we made in the corner, and I'm sorry you're not going to be able to see this very well. You can at least see the level. And we're going to put a perfectly plumb line up from top to bottom. And that there becomes the line that we're going to start laying off of. Our layout line, I'm going to measure and see how far out of plumb these walls are. Right here at bottom, I measure 2 1/8. The midpoint, I also measure 2 1/8. And at the top, I measure 2 1/8. So that means the framers on this particular home did a decent job in plumbing up their walls. So now what we're going to do is, we don't want to be super tight, so I'm going to leave it about an 1/8 inch gap between the back wall and where we're going. So we're going to just establish that we're going to go with 2-inch rippers. So I mark them 2 inches. Now one thing, these little fine point Sharpies are awesome to lay out tile because they're not going to wash off. If you use a graphite pencil, all your lines wash off when the water hits them. I'm just going to quickly make a line. And while the tile's dry, if you can get a couple pieces out of a tile, you're better off to mark them then, because once it gets wet, your lines will just bleed and run everywhere. So another consideration. This tile saw is a wet saw. So as the blade spins, it'll suck water up out of this basin and it'll keep the dust down. Anytime you cut anything that you can cut in a dust-free environment, you're better off. So we got Matt here. He's gonna fire up this saw and show you how to cut it. Now you'll notice these tiles are very long. Most tile saws cannot accommodate a very long tile. And so what you do is as you're cutting that tile, you'll have it sitting up over the back of the fence, but you want the blade to be cutting right as it's exiting the edge of the table. And so you'll just feed your product through almost like you're using a table saw. And so you'll keep the pressure of the blade right about the edge of the table, and you'll just feed it through. And then once you get to where you can lay your tile flat on the table, then you can just use the table as it would normally glide. After you've cut a piece of tile, you can see that you've got a lot of moisture that's on the back of the tile. This particular tile is a ceramic tile, so it's a lot more porous, so the water will absorb into it quicker than, say, a tile that is a porcelain tile. The porcelain tiles don't absorb the water as quickly. And so what happens is if you spread thin set down, you'll have like this film of water, and then the tile won't properly adhere to the thin set. So whenever you cut a tile, you want to take a towel or a rag and wipe the back of that tile to get the water off. Like I say, it's a lot less critical with the ceramic tile because it just absorbs it so quickly, but it's absolutely critical when you're using a porcelain tile. That water will just stay on that back surface for a long time. This right here, this product is called Thin Set. This is the bedding mud that you use to install any type of tile. There's different types of thin sets. Some are for small tiles. Some thin sets are what are called large format, and you use those when you're setting a long tile. They have less slump, and so they'll be able to keep your tiles a lot more level, but they're more money as well. So the first tile that you install when you're going to your line, I like to install the thin set to the back of the tile versus spreading it on the wall, especially where we have such a close distance right here between the back wall and the line. Then you want to put your cut edge, because sometimes they'll get little white chips, against the wall. Put your factory tile edge out where it's going to be seen. And then you press it into place. That way we can make sure that we're on our line so we can carry forward in a nice straight fashion. So now that the tile is up on the wall, what we need to do is space it properly. And for this particular tile job, we're just going to use these 1/8" wedge spacers. We put them into place, adjust this to the line. Sometimes if you need, you can throw a wedge spacer against the wall if you need it to hold it out so it doesn't slouch back. So now with the first course in place, set to the plumb line, we are now ready to begin to lay the rest of the film. So our thin set, you'll notice, has kind of gotten thick. Any type of cement product, after it stands for a moment, or it does what's called slaking. So it can become very stiff and unmovable. And so this right here is just a little bit too dry to lay the tile, because what will happen is if it's really hot, the surface will dry before you can embed the tile in it, and then they will chance falling off the wall at a later point in time. But while we're messing around with this thin set, I'd like to show you a few things. This trowel right here, this is a 1/4 inch by 3/8 by 1/4 inch notch trowel. So it leaves the ridges 3/8 tall at a 1/4 inch wide and a 1/4 inch apart. This is the perfect trowel for the job we're doing at the moment. However, for different installations, this is a little 1/8 inch V-notch trowel. And you can see that'll give a whole different texture to the thin set. This is really good if you're just setting really small tiles and you've got a nice, perfectly smooth surface. Another type of trowel is this one. It's a 1/2 by 1/2 by 1/2. And as you can see, I'm gonna need some more mud. This one leaves a very tall notch. And this is for a large format tile. Say you were setting a tile that was 2 feet wide by 4 feet long, you would want to use it a trowel that left big grooves like this. And what it does is allows that big tile to flow over any imperfections that you might have in your subsurface. This is our thin set that was too dry, so we're going to add a little bit more water to it, just a skosh of water. And this is what's called a bucket mixer, and it's got a big paddle on the end that will thoroughly mix the thin set. With the first row in place, we're ready to spread the field with thin set. So what you'll do is just nice strokes, spread that out. What you're trying to do is avoid big mountains, like I could leave there, because then your tile will rock on those. So what you're trying to do is get that spread out smooth and evenly. To ensure that your tile will go down nice and flat. Now that we've come to the corner of the window, we now need to figure out how we're going to have the tile wrap from the face of the field and back in through the window. This is a small piece of the metal trim that we're going to be using. So what we need is this trim hung over the edge, the perfect distance to allow our piece of tile to go in the side, and also have the thin set behind the tile that will hold it into place. So the thin set with this particular trowel represents approximately 1/8 of an inch. So we need to make sure we have the bedding mortar plus the depth of the tile to allow. So we can check with our tape measure, move it over to our 1/8 of an inch. And that's going to tell us where we're going to place that metal. Now we can measure our tile piece for this edge. I measure from the tile that I'm touching to the metal, inside of the metal edge, 3 3/4 of an inch. Then I need to subtract out the grout joint against the metal and the grout joint against the adjacent tile. So we are going to come up with a rip of 3 1/2 inches to go up this left side of the window. Here's the piece of tile. It's like a giant finger. We're going to put it into place, space it out, and then we're going to verify that we have set this back the proper distance. We're going to place our metal piece in, and then we're going to take the wrap that goes in the side of the window and make sure that when I push it tight to the wall that I have roughly 1/8, which is the distance of one of these spacers, to allow for my mud. So we've got our gap, we've got our 1/8 inch, so we are sitting perfect. At this point in time, we're not going to install the metal. We're going to wait until we go all the way around the opening in this fashion, and then we will install the metal. What I've noticed when I put this tile into place is it's low right here, and at the bottom it is sticking out about, a 1/16 of an inch, and it's probably low a 1/16 of an inch. So what we do is we pull the tile off the wall, and then we're going to read the tile. When you see that there's no lines left anymore and the thin set is just kind of smushed and it looks textured, that means there was more pressure there and it's too thick. What we have here is we had no thin set, which means it never touched in that area. We did get a partial touch here on the side, and then we got a touch up top. So what we need to do is remove the excess thin set from the area where it was low, and then we need to add some additional thin set to the areas where it didn't touch at all. Then we will reinstall that same tile. and see if it lines up better. Now, I no longer have that lip down there, and I'm billed out up here. Now what we're gonna do is we're going to pull this tile up one more time, and I'm gonna show you now how all of the little lines transferred through the tile like they should have. Now there's still a couple little areas we could work on a little more. We could put a little additional in if we felt so inclined, using a margin trowel. But for all intents and purposes, that is a well-bedded tile that can be left in place. We're making some progress. We're to the other side of the window. We've got to do the same thing again. So we're going to place this here. We know that our thin set, our metal, are going to add roughly 1/4 of an inch. So we're measuring 3 inches. We've got to lose 1/4 inch for the metal and the thin set. That's putting us at 2 3/4. And then we also need a gap between those two tiles. So that's going to put us at 2 5/8 of an inch. Come over to our tile. We're going to measure our 2 5/8 of an inch. I'm going to give our cutter some lines to follow. And then I always like to put an X on the piece that is going to be removed, or if you draw a line, put an X so they know which side of the line to cut on, because your blade will eat up anywhere from a 1/16 to an 1/8 of any product you're cutting. And if you're going for a precision job, that makes a pretty big difference. At this point, we've got the left side complete. We've got the bottom corner, the top corner, and now on the right side, we've got the bottom corner. The easiest way to figure out the distance here is measure what we've done on the left side. So our opening is 35 1/8 inch. So what we're going to do is replicate that 35 1/8 inch on this side. And that way, as we come across, we're going to be going in the exact same plane. If we were to try to recalculate it over here off of crooked crane framing, we would then have to start doing angle cuts to either match the higher or the lower plane. So what I like to do is just replicate what I did to one side on the other side, as long as it works with the framing. In this case it does, so let's just roll with it. We've got the piece cut, it's in place. We're going to verify that we've achieved our 35 1/8 that we were looking for, which we're spot on. We'll check on this other side, 35 1/8. Now what we're going to do is we're going to adjust the spread of these two, because we need the tile to fit in there. So we're going to measure here at the bottom. We are 35 1/8 wide. So up top, we would also like to be 35 1/8, which means I need to rock that tile back this way to achieve that 35 1/8 mark. And then we will build from there. Anytime you have a cut piece of tile and the surface area is smaller, it will always require just a little bit more thin set. So right here, adjacent to this piece I'm going to put in, is a full tile. That full tile is going to bridge over that thin set differently than this cut one. So what I can do is anticipate up front, knowing I'm gonna need to put more in, so I don't have to put it in, look at it, pull it off, and then redo it. So what I'm going to do is strike the back of this tile with thin set before I put it in. Just a small layer of thin set. And what it's going to do is just save me time in the end. And then what I do is I'll leave like a little tiny buildup on each one, middle, ends. Make sure it's facing the right way. And then I'll drop it into place. Now what I've done is ensure that it's going to fit the first time without pulling it out and redoing it. Now we've done the left side of the window. We've completed the right side of the window. We've adjusted our gap. Now we need to begin to put the metal in place. You always start with the bottom, then the sides, and then the top is supported by the sides. So we're going to measure right here. We've got 35 and an 8. What we want is an 1/8 inch gap between the tile and the edge of the metal, so we're going to subtract off 1/4 of an inch. So we need 2 pieces of metal cut at 34 and 7/8 of an inch. This is the metal trim that's going to finish the cut edge of the tile. So our first piece we're now going to put into place. It's cut at 34 and 7/8, which is an 1/8 inch shorter on each side. You push it down into place, tie it across the back of the tile. Then we're going to space it with our same spacers because we'd like to have a grout joint between the metal and the tile. So we'll use our same spacers we've been using. Put one at each end. Get one there in the middle. Then we're going to install the upper channel. Same thing. And we're going to put our spacer in. Now once that's in place, we're going to measure the side pieces of metal. And I'm coming up with 34 and 5/8 of an inch. So 2 at 34 and 5/8. We have the top and bottom pieces of metal installed. Now we're going to install the side metal. And the object is these sides are going to hold the upper piece of metal in place. So we're going to adjust them to where we have that nice 1/8 of an inch reveal between the metal and the tile. We've got the same thing up top. And the top piece is resting on that. Now we're going to do the same thing on this other side. It's critical that you put the metal in while your thin set is still fresh. So you have to work quick enough that you can make it around the window before things dry. Otherwise, you're going to have to try to take a multi-tool or something and cut the dry thin set out from behind, which is another step that you don't want to have to go through. All metal's in place. Now we're going to cut the remaining pieces that go across the top of the window. In a moment, I'm going to show you how we're going to brace between the lower trim and the upper trim to hold the weight while those set in place. I've taken the bottom piece of trim and made sure it's well supported right in the middle with some wedge spacers. I've now also cut a board that's the same length as the side trim. I'm going to set that on the center point, and then I'm going to gently slide it beneath the trim. In my hand, I have the closing piece that will bring both the left side and the right side together. Backstrike it. I'm going to add a tiny bit of mud to the bottom edge that's going to bond to the trim. And then I'm going to bring it into place. Now, if you observe, my gaps are too big. I'm probably almost 1/8 wide. So we are going to make that correction right now. That's another reason it's important that you do all this while it's wet. That means these have all slouched this way. So what I'm going to do is begin to gently bring them over because they are still wet, and create the appropriate gap. Because of the weight of these wet tiles sitting across the top of this window, the trim piece is trying to fold back towards the window. So what I've done is cut some temporary blocks that I can place against the window that is going to allow that trim to stay in its forward position like it needs to be without curling back. We've completed the window wall with the exception of wrapping the inside of the window. What we're going to do is let that set for a minute, go grab some lunch. But in the interim, we're going to work on this wall. So the first thing we're going to do is see how plumb this outside wall that we're tying into is. And it is probably almost 1/4 of an inch out. It's leaning inward. So that means that it's closer at the top and further away at the bottom. So what we do is we take a piece of tile, put it tight to the bottom edge, draw a line. Then we're going to take our level and draw a plumb line from the tub all the way up the wall to the top. Then we'll be able to use that line and measure from the line to the tile that's in place. And you see we're at 5 5/8, we're at 5 1/2, and once we hit the top, we're at 5 1/2. So 5 1/2 all the way to 5 7/8. So that 1/4 inch, we're going to cut out of the edge of the tile and let them be plumb out here and let it disappear through the corner. We've had a job site casualty. I went to pull the lid off my Sharpie and the whole thing fell apart. So we're gonna show you another method to lay out a tile without using a Sharpie. You can use painter's tape. Well, the tile's good and dry, you just adhere the tape to the surface of it. Then I was able to transfer my measurements on there, use my level, create my line, and then you make your cut, you pull your tape off, and you're good to go. Some tile, the surface is porous enough that you can just write with pencil on it, cut, and the lines will stay on. You're actually scrubbing them off when you're cleaning it in the end. This particular tile is not very porous, and so our lines are washing off before we can complete our cuts. We've completed the first cut into the wall. The bottom tile actually did not fade enough in that portion to worry about cutting it. The second one, we've gone from full tile to taking off roughly 3/16 of an inch. So what we're going to do is dry fit it before we put the mud behind it to make sure that we're good. So once you get thin set behind the tile and then you're trying to recut it, it's an absolute mess. So as you can see right here at the top, we're exactly on our line. Down at the bottom, we are also exactly on the line. That tells us we've done a good job. We're ready to embed this tile. We're approaching the edge of the tub. So I'm going to just temporarily set a piece of tile there and make a line. Take the level and I'm going to make a plumb line going down. So I'm going to teach you guys our mistake right here. What we didn't do is had we laid this out to see where the tile would hit, we could have avoided this tiny little sliver of a piece. But because we didn't, now we're going to battle this tiny sliver. So that was our mistake. Had we cut more off this tile right here in the corner to start with, we could have shifted that over and then it just would have been a nice notch out of the edge of a full tile instead of leaving a little tiny piece. So learn from our mistakes, not your own. You always want to lay everything out. Just don't get so excited to begin. You don't want to leave 1/8 of an inch here. This is where you want to keep things nice and tight. And then we can run a nice clear bead of silicone around it when we're done. And it'll keep that watertight barrier that we need, but it'll look good as well. So what we've done now is placed the tile to the left of our little thin piece. Now we'll be able to take our tape measure and easily measure off of that tile and figure out the size. All right, this is the final wall in the shower. What I've done is taken a level and checked the tub for level. And as you can see, it's sloping down this way quite a ways, almost 1/4 of an inch. So this line right here represents a level line that we've used to created with the level. This outside line right here is a line that gives us a reference point that's the exact same distance as the back wall that we've already completed. So what we're going to do now is start with our full tile on that line and lay everything this way, and then we'll make our cuts against the wall. So this first tile, we're going to line it up with the outside edge and line it up with our line. Now the problem we're gonna have is gravity is gonna be trying to pull this tile down. Now a little trick we've found over the years, you can see you can take a finish nail. It's narrow enough to fit in between the joint of a tile. So what we can do is pull this tile up to where we'd like it, place the nail right beneath it, drive it in with the hammer. And so that's going to allow that to be held in place while we continue to work up, and then we'll come and finish that lower section after. So right now we're getting ready to go around the shower valve. Now if you look in the hole there, you can see there's 2 threaded holes that hold the escutcheon plate to the valve. A lot of times these valves will have a big round plastic cover on them, and people will worry that they have to try to cut their tile exactly to that. But in all reality, if you remove that plastic, you can cut your tile square, fairly tight around that valve, with a few considerations. You need to be able to gain access to each of the screws to put the escutcheon plate on. And there's a little horseshoe metal piece in the top of the valve that holds the cartridge in. You need to be able to slide that up to pull the cartridge out. So as long as you've accommodated for those 2 things, there's no reason to waste your time trying to cut a circle. So we've discovered with the smaller tile, they're typically almost always ceramic, and they absorb the water quite quickly. So where we've got a lot of work to do on this wall, we don't want to try to get the whole wall done and then try to get the metal piece in. On the other wall, you can see, because they were stacked vertically, this is the oldest mud, and then it was fresher, and the freshest tiles were at the end, so we were able to place them and then slide the trim in. This one, by the time we get to the top, this mud down here might be getting pretty hard. So we're going to you get a few of them up because that'll hold your metal into place, and then you will put it in, and then you're able to spread your thin set out over the top of the metal. And keep it on your line and work it all into place. You can see we're nearing the end of the thin set in our bucket. The reason I like this stuff is it's still got its workability. It's kind of becoming sticky and stiffer. So that really equates to the perfect mix to do the tile across the top. Now they can defy gravity. You put a bed of thin set on the surface, and then we're going to place it on the tile. And what you do is you kind of leave it like a mound. And then as you work it into place, it has space to ooze out of the side. And you just push it until it's perfectly in plane. So that's still got to go in a little bit more. Okay, I'm in plane. I'm lined up, and then you'll just wipe those edges. All right, so we've got the head pieces all complete now. You always do the top first, then you do the sides, and then you do the bottom. The reason you do the sides next is because we can rest them firmly upon the substrate. Otherwise, if you try to put the bottom in first, the weight of these side tiles are going to be pushing your tile in. And you'll come back the next morning and they will have tipped in and they'll be lifted on this side. And so what we've found is best is just to rest those firmly upon the bottom. And so you can see that we've cut this side wrap piece the same height as the other one, so it'll wrap around through the corner. Okay, we were cruising along really quickly down here. The tiles were just laying in really nice. And about right here, I'm starting to get where they're kind of rocking. And so that means we probably have a stud that's got a crown in it, or maybe a nail plate, or the drywallers didn't get the drywall cinched down tight. It's floating over a glob of glue, something. So we can't just leave this. And so what we're going to have to do is pull a couple of these off. So we're gonna have to pull them back, try to remember where they went. You'll find a space for them. We're gonna get down to where it was kind of going south on us. Right about here. So what we're going to do is put a little extra mud behind this guy and bring him out to where he is in plane. Now I can see this has probably got a 1/4 inch crown right there about the middle. The nice thing about shorter tiles is they'll be a little more forgiving and you can kind of float over it. Depends on the look you're going for too. This is like kind of a hand-packed tile look, and so they're not really straight or uniform anyway. So they're going to be a little more tolerant for us. But we're still going to need to mud that inside corner out. So I'm going to, as you can see, I'm going to build this side of the tile up a little bit. And we're going to lessen how much that sticks out. So now they're planing in there much nicer. Same thing again. Build this one out. Reset him. So now he's sitting out. I actually need a little bit more. He's sitting out on, you can see he's a pretty thick mud bed. Now my suspicion is as we get higher on this wall and the stud's near the top plate, this is going to resolve itself and it'll go back to the way it was at the bottom. So this is a very typical thing you'll encounter mid-wall, as things will get a little crazy. So you'll start out real fast, and then you'll hit a crown in the stud, and you'll slow down as you work your way through it to make it look nice, and then you'll pick up speed again. So now everything's plating really nice. Oftentimes, where the shower spout comes out of the wall becomes a problem area, because the drywallers, when they cut the drywall, they will often overcut the hole. Then the taper will come behind and he'll go, oh, that's too big of a gap around the spout. So he'll build it all out and tape 2 or 3 coats, feathering it out. And so what you'll have is you'll come along, you have this mound around the shower head. There's been times where it's been so extreme, I've actually had to take my hammer and smash the area back because that built it out so much. In this case, we did our own prep. That's plenty close. We didn't tape it because we knew the issues it could create. And so we don't have any problem in this during this install. But that's just something we wanted to point out that can be quite problematic. We've finished this entire wall. Now we're working down, fighting gravity. We're going to share an awesome trick by utilizing a 16 gauge finish snell. I'm able to place the tile, and then I just take a finish snell, put it right beneath it, hold it tight to the bottom, a couple tiny taps, and it's up in place. All right, so now we're on the floor. We're going around the toilet flange. What I did is back buttered this tile because we've had that in the water for quite a while, as Matt gently gnawed away and tried to create a circle with a straight blade. So back butter it, then we drop it into place. On your toilet flange, your critical area is your sides. If you really get beyond much more out than what we are there, your toilet might not cover that edge. So if you had to be short anywhere, you're better off to have a bigger gap on the back of the flange or the front of the flange, but your sides of your flanges are really your critical areas. What we're going to do is put a fun pattern in the wood floor. We're gonna have wood floor that transitions into a black hexagon. So what we've done is pre-laid randomly all of the wood tile. Now over the top, we're laying the other tile, just setting them temporarily over the unset tile below. I think that's a pretty good looking line that we're gonna go with. So what we're going to do now is tape all of that so that our lines don't wash away as we cut it, because as you saw earlier, our marker died. Now with everything perfectly positioned on top of the wood tiles and the tape in place, we're going to take a pencil and we're going to trace these edges. I want an 1/8 inch gap, so I'm going to hold my pencil kind of on an edge, on an angle, so that it draws a line that's 1/8 of an inch away from the black hexagon tile. Okay, while everything is still in place, we're going to finish marking this floor drain, or this floor register, because then we don't have to lay everything out again. Okay, at this point, we have set all of the wood look tile with the hexagon shape cut into them. So now what we're going to do is begin to lay the hexagon tiles into the wood look tile. Sometimes if you can't tell if they're in the same plane, bring them together close to each other and then fill them with your finger, and you can feel where they got to go high and low, and then move them back apart. That'll kind of make the thin set mountain up. You can wipe it off, pull them back, and then it'll suck down and be down below the grout line. Just another little trick. A lot of times when you have to manipulate a tile, pressing down on it, you'll ooze up some thin set between the joints. If you let it dry, you'll have to take a razor knife and clean it out. If you just take a moment while it's wet, you can just we use these little tile spacers, but you can just run them through, just clean it up quick, and then you make your grouting job just that much faster to prepare for. That there is another job completed. What do you think? Nice contrasting brick lay wall out of black, the wood look tile, the meshing of the two together in the floor. Oh, seriously not bad, huh?